I'm going to try and be as to the point as possible and also very transparent here about my lack of energy. I'm operating on about an hour and a half of sleep. My wife Jill had to go to the hospital, to the ER, for basically a really bad stomach bug, but we thought it was something worse than that. For those of you who don't know who she is, I'm sure this is just an irrelevant tangent to you, but to everybody else who follows the channel, just kind of letting you know that's kind of why I sound a little glum in this one. Everything's good, though. Everything's good here. What's not good is the situation around Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Switch, I would say, port of the game. A port that I wanted to talk about because we covered this a while ago. When it launched, there were a lot of problems with the game. And it has gotten some updates that have fixed some of the problems, but there has been one major, I would say, untruth told about this game from the start. One major promise that has yet to be fulfilled, and that is the promised DLC for the game. Now, some of you are probably going to think, well, DLC, who cares? Like, if the game's done, it doesn't matter, right? Well, here's the short end of it, and I will also give you a resource to check out if you want more background information. But essentially, when Knights of the Old Republic 2 was released, basically almost 20 years ago at this point, I believe it was like 2004 or 2005, that game was not done. Knights of the Old Republic 2 was not finished. Well, what happened? Why did it get released? Well, it was being pushed for a holiday release. Essentially what happened when it was coming out back then on Xbox and I believe PC at the time, it was being pushed early out so that it could meet demand for a holiday release and get a ton of sales capitalizing off the success of the first game. Now, what sucks about that is a ton of content was cut from the game. A ton. I'm talking a bunch of quests. I'm talking about an actual ending. Seriously, they scrapped most of the ending of the game. The DLC fixed a lot of this stuff. It was all kinds of content that was supposed to be in the game that has been restored by the community, and it is called the Sith Lords Content Restored Pack, basically. I hope I got that right, because I'm, again, very tired. Might have gotten the name itself not completely perfect. But anyway, this was promised from the launch of the Switch version, which was handled by Aspyr Media. Aspyr is basically the treasure trove holders of old Star Wars gaming content. They are the ones who are usually responsible for porting it to more modern hardware. And honestly, they usually do a very good job. But Aspyr was also working on a little thing you might know of as Knights of the Old Republic Remake. And Bloomberg reported that they are no longer doing that. This was a while ago. They were shifted off of Knights of the Old Republic Remake. Now, there is a YouTuber that I watch who covers Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic sometimes. He's actually, very informative, very good. His name is Mr. Matty Plays, and he actually knew people within Aspyr Media kind of during the time when they were working on the actual remake, and he actually saw a little bit of the footage of that game. And he thought it was looking good. He has a few videos up about this situation with the remake and also Knights 2. So as a mega fan, he was thinking it was looking good. And I think the team at Aspyr was thinking it was looking good too. But now, as reported by Bloomberg, a handful of months ago, Aspyr is no longer working on Knights of the Old Republic Remake. So what does that have to do with Knights of the Old Republic 2 and its DLC? Well, this was promised for Q3 of 2022. We are way past that at this point. There has been no update on this DLC, none at all. And even worse than that, they removed the mention of the DLC from their YouTube trailer that they uploaded on their Aspyr YouTube page. If you actually go and check out the uploads of this trailer by things like Nintendo, and I believe also IGN uploaded the trailer, they have an extra 4 or 5 seconds at the end of the trailer promising that Sith Lords Restored Content Pack mod DLC for Switch. If you actually go to Aspyr's video of that, it no longer says that. It has been updated to remove mention of this DLC completely and kind of sweep it under the rug as in like, well, look, there's no promise here, but there was a promise here to deliver this content to players. So I guess the question is what happened here, and is this DLC still going to come out? Because this was actually really only caught now by The Gamer, the website. They actually published an article a few days ago talking about their theory on it that the KOTOR 2 DLC has been quietly canceled. They have a whole article up about it that I'm going to link in the description down below because I think it's pretty interesting. Some of this cut content, by the way, was going to include things like entire areas, side quests, a whole character quest for basically a one of your companions, HK. This was going to include all kinds of stuff and a lot more of the moral choices and dilemmas that players love from this game, along with actually giving you an ending, because the ending in the original game is really abrupt and incomplete. This was going to be a very, very big update that was going to add a lot to the game and actually make it, I would say, worth playing on Switch. I'm going to be honest with you, the promise of this DLC is what made this worth playing on Switch, unless this was your only way to ever experience Knights of the Old Republic 2. Because this content mod is on PC and it does work on PC. But if you have the Xbox version of the game or now the Switch version of the game, you have no access to that DLC. And for the Switch version of the game, it's looking like you might never have access to that cut content on the Switch. So now, unless the Switch is your only way to play Knights of the Old Republic 2, not a dig, I'm being serious. Like, you're never going to buy an Xbox. You know, you don't have the original disc for that game. You don't buy it digitally there. You don't have a gaming PC, right? You don't buy it on Steam. I think it's on tablet too. Maybe you don't own a tablet. I don't own a tablet. Maybe you don't. So basically my point is, if Switch is your only way to play the game, cool. Then you get the base experience that everybody got at launch. Back on the Xbox original, a little bit of a glitch, issue, kind of off and on. One of them broke the entire game and made it so you could not actually progress. But a lot of those have been fixed over time, so you can still experience a good game as it was released. The problem is that restored content transforms KOTOR 2 from a good game into a fantastic game. So because of this, they are really toning down what this release was actually capable of. This is going to be a really big deal to a lot of people who I think they're hoping forgot about it, because now on their social media, when anyone asks about this, when anyone says, hey, where is the DLC? What happened to it? There's no mention of it. Nobody will talk about it. The social media people won't answer. There's no real update on the positioning of it. And it really sucks because, as Mr. Matty Plays said, I actually agree with him and his I would say educated guess on this. I think that once the development team at Aspyr was removed from the remake, my personal opinion is once that happened, I think that they were kind of removed from doing a lot of other Star Wars stuff as well. Because Embracer Group owns Aspyr, and this project was essentially shown to Embracer Group, the owner of Aspyr Media, and shown to Disney and PlayStation and all these people, right? And the report was from Bloomberg, essentially, they didn't like it. They didn't like what they saw, they didn't like what Aspyr was doing, and they pulled the plug on it and gave it to Saber Interactive. Now, Saber's a good company. They made a fantastic game that I love, Evil Dead. I love that game very, very much. They also made, I believe, I'm like 99% sure they did World War Z, the game. Very good game. So I'm not saying they can't make games. I don't know if I would be like, that's the guys, that's them, that's the guys to do Knights of the Old Republic remake. It did come up again in an investor call. Again, this is another thing that was covered on Mr. Matty Plays channel, so I don't want to just steal his thunder here. So you can check that out on his. But essentially, they're not talking about it. They're not talking about the remake, and they're also not talking about this DLC. This DLC has been left as kind of a broken promise. And now that history is being rewritten in a way, they're going back to the YouTube trailer and deleting out the part where they promised that DLC. That is just a very, very bad look. And I don't really know who's to blame for this whole thing. I mean, you can kind of just pass the blame around. You could say, well, maybe it's Disney. They didn't like what they saw with this remake. Maybe they pulled the plug and didn't want, this specific studio working on Star Wars stuff anymore. Maybe they're being protective of it after all the blowback from the sequels and all these other projects. Maybe they're just trying to protect the brand. Haven't done a great job doing that on other things, but maybe that's what they're doing here. Or maybe you could say it's Embracer Group. Maybe they were embarrassed. They didn't like what was shown to Disney, and Disney didn't like it, so they took it out on Aspyr, and they pulled them off of these kinds of projects, and now they're not working on them anymore. We don't really know. We don't know at the end of the day, because nobody is actually in Aspyr, working there, typing up a whole leaked dossier about where this thing is. It's just being quietly removed from the internet. I'm genuinely shocked it's still actually mentioned in the Q&A about the Switch version of Knights of the Old Republic 2 there on their website. So that's one thing where I'm kind of sitting here looking and I'm like, if you guys were going to remove all mention of this like you did from the YouTube trailer, I would think that you would be diligent enough to go and scrub that clean too, right? You would go remove that too. If there was some kind of incriminating evidence of me out there in 5 places, and I just remove it from 3, and it's still out there in 2, you would think that if I'm doing the diligence to go back in time, essentially, and just kind of change what I said, that I would be doing the diligence to do that everywhere. I wouldn't be leaving breadcrumbs of it all over the place so someone can look it up and be like, oh yeah, they did promise this. I would think I would be trying harder to cover that up. So it's really weird, this situation. To me, this just feels like an empty promise, like a lie. That's what this whole thing feels like to me. Because it comes across again as the promise was, you will get all this cut content for free later. And what sucks is it should have just been on the cartridge. This thing should have been delayed. I don't understand why there was a push to rush out the KOTOR 2 port from 20 years ago, a game from 20 years ago. Yeah, I get it. There was some hype around the remake, but there was no reason to actually rush this port out. And especially when you look at the port of KOTOR 1, it's well done. Done well, works well, and the game runs fine. When it comes to 2, I don't really understand why, if they were going to include this and kind of make a big promise out of it, they didn't just do that at the beginning on cartridge, maybe slow this thing down by a few months. I like the work that Aspyr has done in the past, but the whole radio silence thing of don't mention it, don't talk about it, it's the elephant in the room, maybe leave it alone, gamers will forget about it, that kind of mentality of just promising something and then not delivering on it is really unfortunate, because a lot of people bought this version of the game specifically for easier access to that DLC content. When you play on PC, and I say this as a PC gamer as well, there can be problems. For example, I record Let's Plays, I record gameplay. Knights of the Old Republic 2 does weird things with recording. The game just runs weird. That's the easiest layman's term way I can put it. I go and try and record gameplay of that in OBS. You have to jump through hoops. You have to do things like display capture. You have to change your settings a bunch. You have to kind of mess around with it. And also, even with the Steam Workshop, where you can install these kind of mods and put back in this classic content, there are certain things you can do that can mess up your game if you don't know what you're doing. If you're adding too many things at a time, not paying attention, that sort of thing, you can kind of mess that up. This was going to be a very clean, streamlined, easy way for people to play through this game, record it, be able to get that DLC and content, and you actually could use that very easily. Unfortunately, it's looking like that's just not going to happen. Maybe it will change in the future, but as of right now, this just kind of looks like one big empty promise / lie. I feel like Star Wars only comes up for me when it's something bad, and that frustrates me. And I know that part of that's me. You could say, well, Jay, you're not paying attention to the right things. Sure. But for me, this specific game is something I grew up playing. I grew up on Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. I love these games. They impacted my life. I learned to read better from these games. I spent countless hours playing through these games, having a fun time, creating characters, making decisions, thinking about things. These games made me think about morality. These games made me think about decision making. They made me think about the world. They made me actually apply questions asked in them to the real world outside of them. That's not something I can say for a lot of games. So to see this thing kind of just treated with disrespect, just kind of tossed to the wayside, kind of sloppily thrown out there and then discarded with an empty promise, it's so unfortunate to me. And I really think it kind of encapsulates the problem with a lot of modern gaming. Over-promising stuff you can't do, and basically just taking the easy way out when things get hard. I don't necessarily blame Aspyr for it, because if they were pulled off this by Embracer, or they were pulled off this by, Disney or any of these people, right, or Lucasfilm or whatever you want to say, that's those companies, right, above them. But I do think that everyone is to blame for not being transparent about this. I don't think the way to do it is to just break your promises. And it's especially a bad look for a company like Disney because, in my opinion, they've had a lot of snafus and I would say mistakes with honoring promises in the past. There have been a lot of things coming out, over the years of like, well, Disney said this, but they didn't do it. And I think that those kinds of stories piling up, and then also you add this game on top of it, it's just a tiny example of it, but it's just another thing of like, well, now that these people own Star Wars and are beholden to no one, and they don't have to honor any promises, they don't honor promises. Like, it just wasn't honored. So it's one of those things where it's like, even if this does come out in the future, it didn't come out in Q3 of 2022, and no one ever bothered to talk about it. There was zero transparency. It just is really frustrating and sad. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think that this will still come out? Do you not? Do you care? When you make a promise as a company, when you make a promise to deliver something, you should follow through on that thing, right? Same with individual people. You're making promises, you should be following through on those things. Your word should mean something to you. Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I hope you all have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.